I want to tell you about the worst morning of my life. That it wasn't the morning of a funeral. It wasn't a diagnosis. It wasn't anything with a name that people recognize and rally around. It was just an ordinary Tuesday, 6 weeks before my wedding, when I woke up and reached for my phone to text my best friend, like I did every single morning, and found a message that stopped everything. She was gone. And so was he, that my best friend of 14 years. My fiancé of 2. Gone. Together, that I won't dress it up. I won't soften the edges of it. She had been sleeping with the man I was about to marry. And when it became too big to hide, they didn't come to me. They didn't confess. They simply disappeared into a situation they had apparently been building behind my back while I was busy picking centerpieces and writing vows and believing, with my whole heart, that I was the luckiest woman in the room. That I remember standing in my kitchen that morning in my dressing gown, holding my phone, reading the message she had sent, not a call, a message, and feeling something I can only describe as a total system failure. Not tears, not rage, just silence. The kind of silence that happens when your mind refuses to load what your eyes are reading. 6 weeks before my wedding. The dress was hanging in my wardrobe. The invitations had already gone out. My mother had flown in from out of town. And the 2 people I trusted most in the world had been lying to my face, smiling at me, hugging me, toasting to my happiness, while building an entirely different story I wasn't allowed to know about. What people don't tell you about this kind of betrayal is that it's not one loss. It's every loss at once. The relationship, the friendship, the future you had planned, the version of yourself who trusted people so completely, the memories you now have to go back through and re-examine with devastating new context. Every dinner, every phone call, every moment that felt like safety, all of it gets quietly contaminated. And then there is the shame. The particular, irrational, crushing shame of being the woman who didn't see it coming, who talked about her wedding to the woman who was sleeping with her groom, who called her best friend crying over seating arrangements while her best friend was keeping the biggest secret of both their lives. That I am 40 now. I have survived things I never thought I would have to survive. But nothing prepared me for that specific pain. The double disappearance of a lover and a best friend, in a single morning, with no warning and no goodbye. What I learned on the other side of it is what this video is about. Because you deserve more than you'll find better people. Let me tell you what actually helped. I want to be honest with you about something before we go any further. For a long time after it happened, I didn't talk about it. Not really. I gave people the surface version, the headline without the details, and then quickly redirected the conversation because the full story felt like too much. Too raw. Too humiliating. Too tangled up in feelings I hadn't yet found the right words for. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about this particular kind of betrayal. It sits at a crossroads of grief that our culture doesn't have a clean category for. It's not a breakup. It's not a divorce. It's not a bereavement. And yet it carries grief from all 3 simultaneously. You have lost a romantic partner. You have lost a best friend. You have lost a future you had already started living in your imagination. And you have lost, perhaps most painfully, a version of yourself that felt safe enough to trust people completely. When I eventually started speaking about it, first in therapy, then quietly with other women, I discovered something that both comforted and broke my heart at the same time. That I was not alone. Not even close. The specifics varied. But the shape of it, the best friend's betrayal, the particular savagery of being deceived by someone who had full access to your inner world, came up again and again. Women in their 30s. Women in their 40s. Women who, like me, had considered themselves smart, grounded, good at reading people. Women who had no idea. So I started researching. Not to build a case or assign blame. I was done with that, but because I genuinely needed to understand what had happened to me. Not just emotionally, but psychologically. Why did it hurt in a way that felt categorically different from other pain I had experienced? Why did it affect my ability to trust so completely, not just romantically but in friendships, in professional relationships, in everyday interactions with people who had given me no reason for suspicion? What I found was that science actually has a lot to say about this. Researchers studying social betrayal, particularly work coming out of institutions like UCLA and the University of Michigan, have found that the brain processes social rejection, and betrayal using some of the same neural pathways it uses to process physical pain. This is not a metaphor. When you say a betrayal feels like being physically struck, your brain is not being dramatic. It is accurate. But more specifically, researchers studying what is called a dual betrayal, the simultaneous loss of a romantic partner and a close friend, have found that this particular combination creates a uniquely destabilizing effect on a person's sense of identity, not just their trust, their actual sense of who they are. Because we build our self-concept partly through our closest relationships. When two of those anchors disappear at once, and disappear together, the ground doesn't just shift, it dissolves entirely. That is what I experienced. And that is what I want to help you understand and recover from. Today. So what do you actually do with this kind of pain? Not the surface pain, the deep structural damage that a dual betrayal leaves behind. The kind that shows up months later when someone offers you a compliment, and your first instinct is to wonder what they want. The kind that makes you hesitate before being vulnerable with anyone new. The kind that quietly rewires the way you move through the world. That I want to give you a framework, not a feel-good checklist. A genuine map for what recovery actually looks like, because it is not linear, it is not fast, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never been through it. I call it the 3 chambers of betrayal recovery. And you cannot skip a chamber. You cannot jump from the first to the third, because the second feels too uncomfortable. Each one has to be walked through fully before the next one becomes accessible. Chamber 1. Radical acknowledgement. The first instinct after a betrayal of this magnitude is to manage it, to contain it, to hold it together for the people around you. Your family who had already bought their flights, your colleagues who didn't need to know, yourself most of all. To perform functionality while internally the walls are coming down. Radical acknowledgement means the opposite of that. It means sitting down with the full weight of what happened and refusing to minimize it. Not catastrophizing, just refusing to make it smaller than it is to make other people more comfortable. Or yourself. This is harder than it sounds. Because the moment you name it fully, I was betrayed by my best friend and my fiancé simultaneously, 6 weeks before my wedding, by 2 people who had complete access to my trust. The grief becomes very large very quickly. And large grief is terrifying. But here is what I know now. Grief that is not acknowledged does not dissolve. It relocates. It shows up as rage at small things, numbness at big things, and a persistent low-level anxiety that you can't quite trace to a source. Radical acknowledgement is not wallowing. It is the only honest starting point. Chamber 2. Identity excavation. This is the chamber most people skip entirely. And it is the reason so many people find themselves repeating painful relationship patterns years after a major betrayal. When a dual betrayal happens, it doesn't just damage your trust in other people. It damages your trust in yourself. Your own perception. Your own judgment. You start asking questions that feel almost too frightening to sit with. How did I not see this? What does it say about me that I trusted so completely? Who am I without this relationship, without this friendship, that I had built so much of my life around? Identity excavation means going into those questions instead of away from them. It means getting genuinely curious about which parts of yourself existed before these relationships, and which parts were constructed around them. It means asking, honestly and without cruelty, whether there were signals you dismissed, boundaries you didn't hold, a version of yourself you silenced to keep the peace. This is not self-blame. Let me be completely clear about that. What they did was their choice and their responsibility, fully. Identity excavation is not about assigning fault. It is about reclaiming authorship. It is about becoming someone who knows herself so specifically that she can never again be quite so fully invisible to herself. Chamber 3. Deliberate reconstruction. This is where most advice about betrayal begins. Get back out there. Trust again. Open your heart. And it is not wrong. It is just catastrophically premature without the first 2 chambers. Deliberate reconstruction means consciously, carefully choosing how to rebuild. Not rebuilding the same structure on the same ground. Building something new, with different materials, different standards, and a different understanding of what you actually need from closeness. It means learning to extend trust in smaller, testable amounts rather than all at once. It means building friendships and connections slowly, Watching behavior over time rather than bonding immediately on feeling alone. It means choosing people who have proven, not just promised, that they can hold what you give them. Radical acknowledgement. Identity excavation. Deliberate reconstruction. Point 3 chambers. In order. No shortcuts. Because the goal is not just to survive this. The goal is to come out of it knowing yourself more completely than you did before it happened. That is possible. I promise you it is possible. But first, we need to dismantle something that is going to get in the way. Here's where I need to say something that might upset some people. And I'm going to say it anyway, because this is the thing that kept me stuck longer than anything else. Longer than the grief. Longer than the anger. Longer than the sleepless nights and the cancelled wedding venues and the returned gifts. It was the advice. Specifically, the well-meaning, warmly delivered, completely unhelpful advice that came flooding in the moment people found out what had happened. And I want to name the worst offenders, because if you're in this right now, some version of these phrases has probably already reached you. She wasn't a real friend to begin with. This one is meant to comfort. What it actually does is erase 14 years. Because here is the complicated, painful truth that nobody wants to sit with. She probably was a real friend. For a long time. People are not simply one thing. Villains who were always villains wearing friendship as a costume. The person who betrayed me was also the person who drove to my house at midnight when my father was in hospital, who knew my coffee order and my deepest fears and which specific tone of voice meant I was about to cry before I knew it myself. Both things are true. She was a real friend. And she betrayed me catastrophically. Collapsing that complexity into she was never real doesn't protect you. It just makes you distrust your own perception of every relationship you've ever had. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. I understand what this means. I do. And there is eventually truth in it. But the timeline that gets attached to this advice is quietly brutal. Women in acute betrayal trauma are handed this concept like a prescription. Take twice daily, feel better soon, with no acknowledgement of how long and nonlinear the path to genuine forgiveness actually is. Forgiveness that is performed before it is felt is not forgiveness. It is suppressed with better branding. And suppressed pain, as we have already established, does not disappear. It relocates. Give yourself the grace of grieving fully before you demand forgiveness of yourself. Everything happens for a reason. No. I'm sorry. Some things just happen. Some people just make devastating choices that rupture other people's lives. Forcing meaning onto fresh trauma doesn't create healing, it creates pressure. The meaning, if it comes at all, comes later. It emerges slowly from the work of recovery, not from deciding in week 2 that the universe had a plan. And perhaps the most dangerous advice of all. Just open your heart again. Don't let them make you closed off. As if the natural, intelligent, self-protective response to having your trust catastrophically violated is a character flaw to be corrected. Caution after betrayal is not bitterness. It is wisdom. The goal is not to return to the same wide-open trust you had before, because that trust was built without the information you now have. The goal is to build something more discerning, more conscious, more yours. You are not broken because you cannot immediately trust again. You are human. And you are paying attention. That instinct, that careful, watchful, newly sharpened instinct, is not your wound. It might just be your greatest teacher. I want to give you something practical. Something that costs nothing, requires no therapist, no journal, no wellness app. And that genuinely changed the architecture of how I move through the world after everything collapsed. I call it the loyalty audit. And it is not what you think it is. Most people after a betrayal instinctively do one of two things. They either close off completely, building walls so high that nobody meaningful can get in, or they swing to the opposite extreme, desperately seeking replacement closeness, rushing new people into the vacancy left behind, and unknowingly repeating the same pattern with different faces. The loyalty audit is the third option, the one nobody talks about. And it works because it shifts your focus away from the person who hurt you and back onto the people who didn't. Here is exactly how it works. Take a piece of paper. Draw 3 columns. At the top of each column, write one word. Consistent. Present. Quiet. Now think back, not from yesterday but from the last 2 or 3 years of your life. and begin listing names. Consistent means people who showed up repeatedly without being asked. Not dramatically. Not with grand gestures. Just reliably, repeatedly, without keeping score. The friend who always remembered. The colleague who always checked in. The family member who called even when you hadn't called first. Present means people who were physically or emotionally there during a hard moment. Any hard moment. Without making it about themselves. Without offering unsolicited opinions. Without disappearing when things got heavy. People who could simply sit with you in difficulty without needing to fix it or exit it. Quiet means people who kept your secrets. People you told something private to, maybe something small, maybe something significant. And it never went anywhere. It just stayed safe. With them. Quietly. Now look at your 3 columns. The names that appear in all 3, consistent, present, and quiet. Those are your people. Your actual people. Not the ones who were the most exciting or the most fun or the most validating in the early days of friendship. The ones who proved through behavior over time that they could actually hold you. Here is what I discovered when I did this exercise 6 months after my world fell apart. She, my former best friend, appeared in 1 column. Maybe. On a good day. But there were 3 other women whose names appeared in all 3. 3 women I had been quietly undervaluing because they weren't as electric, as entertaining, as central to my social identity as she had been. I had been mistaking intensity for loyalty, chemistry for safety, history for trustworthiness. The loyalty audit doesn't just show you who your real people are. It shows you the criteria you've been using to choose closeness, and whether those criteria have actually been serving you. Because the goal going forward is not to never trust again. The goal is to trust better, more deliberately, with evidence instead of just feeling. And that starts with seeing clearly what trustworthiness actually looks like, because it has been there all along, in quieter, steadier, less glamorous forms than you recognized. Your people are not gone. You just finally know how to see them. If you've made it this far, I want you to know something. The fact that you're here, watching this, sitting with this, willing to look honestly at one of the hardest experiences a woman can go through. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of everything. Here is what I want you to do right now. Just one thing. Take out a piece of paper and draw those 3 columns. Consistent. Present. Quiet. Don't overthink it. Don't edit yourself. Just write the names that come honestly, and see what the page shows you. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do in the middle of devastating loss is turn our eyes, even briefly, even imperfectly, toward what remains. What is still here? Who is still here? You lost 2 people who should have protected you. That is real and that is devastating, and you are allowed to grieve it for as long as it takes. But you are not empty. And you are not alone. And you are not the sum of what they did to you. You are what you do next. If this video spoke to something you're carrying right now, drop a comment below. You don't have to share details. Even just "I needed this today" is enough. This community is a space for honest, judgment-free conversation. And every comment reminds someone else that they are not going through this alone. That if someone in your life is navigating betrayal right now, share this with her. It might be the most important thing she watches this year. Subscribe for more honest, research-grounded conversations about rebuilding after loss, because there is so much more to cover, and you deserve every bit of it. I'll see you in the next one. Disclaimer. The content shared in this video is based on personal experience and publicly available research, and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute professional psychological, therapeutic, or legal advice. Betrayal trauma can have serious and lasting effects on mental health and emotional well-being. If you are experiencing significant distress, depression, anxiety, or difficulty functioning as a result of a betrayal or relationship loss, please seek the support of a licensed therapist or qualified mental health professional. You deserve real, personalized care, and asking for help is always the right move.